Hey everybody, I'm just jumping in to let you know that this is the first part in the two-part video for Patry, and the second part will be uploaded on the 20th of August 2020. So with that said, let's get into the video.
Hey everyone, so Patry or Patry was the antagonist for most of the Elf Saga for Black Clover, and in my opinion, he is one of the best antagonists for current gen manga and Shonen Jump that is going on weekly. And actually, would it be current gen? Because Black Clover has been going on for 5 years, and it's the third or fourth oldest manga in the goddamn magazine. I'm old. But anyway, this particular video is about Patry, one of the best antagonists, like I said, of the current generation of manga, I guess. In this video, I'm going to be talking about how he was the best antagonistic character in the entire arc, or the entire saga, or perhaps the entire series so far, and why it was so unfair that he was overshadowed by the word magic devil towards the end of the saga. And you know, that's such a shame because his character was written so well by Tabata. So today I decided to break down Patry's character motivations, character history, future, and like all of his personality and everything, so that you get a better understanding as to what his character truly is and why I call him one of this generation's best antagonists. Hey everyone, my name is Buzzard and welcome to Dissecting Patry, a Black Clover character analysis. Let's go. Now, before we begin, I think it's important to understand what the difference between an antagonist is and what a villain is. Now, an antagonist is merely characterized by an opposing worldview. So, an antagonist is a character who fulfills a role for opposing the protagonist. So, in this particular instance, you would take Patry as the antagonist and the Clover Kingdom as a whole as a protagonist, because his opposing views, which is to destroy the Clover Kingdom because humans are all evil, is in direct opposition to the humans who believed the elves were the monsters and that the humans were the good ones. Now, if you call a character an antagonist, it doesn't actually tell you what the personality type, the character archetype is supposed to be for that particular character. It is simply a plot role. A villain is someone who actually actively wishes evil intent upon characters in the story. He may or may not oppose the main character or the protagonists, but he is very distinctively evil. So that's where the difference between the two antagonists and the villain comes in, right? So a villain is for sure evil. You know and you understand the personality type, the character archetype, everything. An antagonist can be a villain, but in this case, Patry can be exclusively identified as an antagonist because he's not purely evil. He has motivations, he has proper driving force behind what he's doing, which is not necessarily evil from his perspective. It is just justice that is being enacted on particular characters. Now, before we get into the first chapter or the first part of the video, I'll be really grateful if you could leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more content of this type. Now, with that said, let's get into the first chapter or the first part of this video, the incident. Now, before we come to understanding who Patry was during the course of the story, I think it's really important to identify who Patry was prior to the incident that happened. In order to understand that, we need to understand who Licht was to Patry. To Patry, Licht was perhaps an older brother, or like this perfection personified type of a character that he needed to strive towards, right? He saw Licht as God like intended elves to be. He saw perfection over there, and he innately had this dislike for humans. I don't understand why they never properly explored it, but I guess they do give us enough context for why he hates humans. So before the incident happened, let's understand what Patry's worldview was. So why did Patry think of Licht this way, right? There are multiple reasons why he could think of this, but I picked out two. So number one is a 4-leaf clover grimoire, which is like really important to Patry, because if you like take a look at the moment that Patry was resurrected, he went and he got a grimoire of his own. He realized, oh man, I'm chosen, right? So he realizes that 4-leaf clover grimoires are amazing, and that like people who are chosen by that grimoire are like chosen individuals, right? So he like respected Licht because of that one reason. The second reason would obviously be Licht's characterization, his personality, the way he treated others, where his kindness knew no bounds, and all of that stuff, right? So due to these two reasons, he like respected the hell out of Licht. So now when he first saw Tetia and Lumiere, he was really constantly questioning himself, or rather he was like, initially he was like convinced that, oh damn, these humans, you know, they're dirty, they're gonna like ruin Licht or something. But then eventually he's like, why is Licht still like interacting with them? And then he saw that Lumiere had a 4-leaf clover, and as we know, that's one of the reasons why he respects Licht. So he's like, oh man, so is this person on the level of Licht? And even beyond that, he was able to outgrow, even if a little bit, his hatred for humans when he was able to understand what Lumiere was trying to say. When he said all elves and humans should be able to live together in harmony, he really took that to heart. But not everything can last. So that's when the incident happened. Now, as we all know, the devil was the one who was actually responsible for the entire incident, but it's important that we understand that Patry had no knowledge of this. He was just completely thought that it was the humans doing this. So So what did he see? On this wedding day between the prince's sister and Licht, he didn't see the prince there, number one. And the second thing that happened was like all the elves there, all their mana was like completely restricted. And the third thing he saw was like a rain of white swords or like light swords coming down at them and killing them basically. So very clearly he understands that, oh man, this is like the human that's doing this to us. And then he looks up, he sees his Licht and like Licht's Tetia in his arms like dying, and then he sees like forbidden spells like all around Licht's head, right? So and then immediately after that he dies, and then he wakes up and then he looks in the mirror, he sees Licht there. He's inside Licht's body, or at least a body that resembles Licht's body, right? So what does he think there? He realizes that when he dies, Licht activated a forbidden spell which allowed him to resurrect himself and inside Licht's body. So he took this to mean a lot of things that we will get into later on, but this is basically how he died. He died with like this hatred for humans inside his heart, which the devil used to his masterclass like manipulation. So like we'll get to that later on, because the devil is such an important character and an interesting character for Patry's character as a whole. So I will definitely have a part dedicated to him later on in the video, or if I make a part 2, that'll be there. So now that we understand who Patry was beforehand, we need to understand who Patry was for the duration of the majority of the Elf Saga. And to do that, we need to take a look at the Eye of the Midnight Sun. So, the next part of Patry's journey majorly dealt with the organization named the Eye of the Midnight Sun. Now, before we get into breaking everything down, let's talk about that name, the Eye of the Midnight Sun. What does that particularly mean? Well, before we answer that, let's take a look at what he named the Magic Knight squad that was helmed by William. He named it the Golden Dawn. Okay, so now we have two of these names. Put the Golden Dawn to the back of your head and we'll take a look at why it's called the Eye of the Midnight Sun. So, what does a Midnight Sun mean? Well, to put it quite literally, it is when the sun is up in the sky during midnight. Now, this phenomenon happens over a few places, I guess in Norway, but this is par for the course because we know that Tabata takes a lot of inspiration from Norse mythology. So, why Midnight Sun? Why Eye of the Midnight Sun? And most importantly, why Golden Dawn? So, like I said earlier, a midnight sun is when the sun lights up the sky during midnight. What does this have to do with the elves? So, you see, after the elves were killed off, right, they were brought back with the resurrection spell. But it was not an immediate effect, right? They had to wait for a few hundred years before it was activated. So, during that particular portion of time, the humans thrived, whereas the elves were wiped out. Maybe few survivors are remaining, we don't know that yet. But basically, for the elves, this was a period of midnight where it was completely dark, and we don't understand exactly what they were feeling during this particular slumber. Alright, again, this is an allegory for midnight when there's nothing there. So, what does the sun during the midnight represent? The sun represents the fact that even though the elves are dead, their souls are still in slumber and are waiting for an opportunity to rise over the sky during the midnight as the midnight sun itself. So now that we understand that, let's take a look at what the Eye represents. So the Eye represents the organization itself that was formed by Patry, which takes a look at all the misdeeds that the humans have done over this hour of midnight for the elves, right? So eventually, when the midnight sun rises, it can put a light to all these misdeeds that were done by the humans, eventually leading the world into a golden dawn. See what I did there? Yeah? Now, it's quite apparent that if you finish the Elf Saga, then most of the Golden Dawn members were actually just reincarnated elves that were chosen by William, but William actually states that the mana showed him who to choose. So that was basically Patry telling William from inside to choose these people. So when they eventually wake up, they can get together as a group, awakening from this multi-year-long slumber or multi-century-long slumber, eventually leading into this Golden Dawn. So now that we're done with the trivia part of the video, let's get into the character of Patry during this particular timing as a leader of the Eye of the Midnight Sun. So, when Patry wakes up from his multi-century long slumber, he wakes up into the body of Licht. So I think I mentioned this earlier in the video as well. So he goes up to the mirror, he sees Licht's body and face, and he's completely perplexed, right? So, and then he immediately looks out of his window and he sees elven souls coming down from the heavens into multiple bodies that we eventually find out who they are, right? So at this moment, what does Patry assume? Patry assumes that at the end of Licht's life, right? Because I mentioned this earlier, he understood what Licht was doing as the activation of the forbidden spell in order to reincarnate the elves, and to see that he had reincarnated himself into that of Licht's body, and when he went out and he got a grimoire, it was a 4-leaf floor grimoire. Patry, that was like the ultimate sign that he was the chosen one, that he had to save all these elves, he had to get revenge on humans for doing what they did. Now obviously we understand that it's not the humans that did this, it was the devil, but eventually we'll get to that. But because of this, he understands and he thinks that to be born in Licht's body is it's to be embodying him. So after this, what he does is he completely alters his own personality to match that of Licht's, right? He becomes like this godlike being. He's super forgiving to particularly only the people he is allied with, right? So you see Sally and Valtos and Radis, like they're all completely forgiven by him, early on, right? So we see that character of him, he see that personality of him, which is admittedly the part of Licht's personality, right? We see him being completely kind to these people, and what's more important here is how he's super, super crazy when it comes to humans that are not allied with him. So what does this mean to Patry when he sees Licht's face when he's standing in front of the mirror? It means only one thing to him. It means that you are now the leader of the elves, and you are responsible for the elves and their reincarnation. Now, to add as further evidence to this, we see when he opens the window, we see the elven souls coming down, and this is important because, like I mentioned earlier, this is how Patry knew who to select to be members of the Golden Dawn as William. But one of the only exceptions to this case is actually Mimosa. So now we can just say that, oh yeah, she's an anomaly, but is that really the case? Now, before we answer that question, I would like to give a huge shout out to Black Tempest, who wrote the following portion of the script. So let's go.
Now, let's answer that question. As a royal, it is stated by Nozel to Noel that royals did not have to go through the exam, and as a Vermilion, Mimosa would have been expected to join the Crimson Lions. But she didn't want this, as she assumedly did not want to be overshadowed by her cousins. So, Fuego Leon arranged for William to take her into the Golden Dawn, which leads to an interesting question. Did Patry want Mimosa in the squad? Patry had the Golden Dawn wear clothes similar to that of human royals from his time. Ratri, who was Patry's cousin, who had also taken over the body of Langris, even comments on how twisted this is. Now, it was the reawakened elves reversing roles with the royals of the past by being the ones to betray the humans, indicative of the symbolism of wearing the same clothing as the ones who were the original betrayers. But the most important point here is how Patry, in trying to emulate Licht, let Mimosa, a royal who was a descendant of Tetia's bloodline who also happened to look almost identical to her, join the squad. We saw that all the humans that were possessed were all pretty much identical to their elven counterparts. From looks to personality to magic type, or one of a similar wavelength as the show described it, they were identical. This, while not outright stated, is likely due to the spell the word devil used, named Noad Nepesh, which means destined soul. Add this with the fact that it's called reincarnation magic, which for those who don't know literally means to enter the flesh again, and the migration of a soul from one body to another, we understand that all the people that were possessed by the elves were literally born or created to become the hosts of the elves. This leads to the elves enjoying the luxury of a body with the same magic type that they had in life. Now, before we get back to Patry's psyche, let's take a look at how the elves were able to use the grimoires of the humans and why Patry had to use his own. All the elves reincarnated into people with the same magic except for Lyra, who had scribble magic but then gained picture magic once he took over Rill. The point is, no matter what magic type the human had, the elves would have still possessed that magic, but obviously wouldn't have been the same proficiency in using it. This is proven when the Third Eye Fauna was able to use the Mineral of Mars or Lyra with picture magic. Now, Patry would have also been able to use William's grimoire, but one thing separated him from all the other cases of reincarnation. The unique thing about Patry is that he didn't subjugate William's soul like all the other elves did. The type of possessions can be basically summarized into 4 categories. First is the standard one, where the elf forcibly controls the human soul, such as all the elves who reincarnated during the elf arc. An example would be Charlotte, who was taken over by Charla. Second is Raya, who experienced 2 reincarnations, fully killing the human soul inside him on the second one. Third is Fauna and Veto, who at this point had 3 grimoires in their lives. One 500 years ago, another being the grimoires that the human they possessed had, and a final one when they came back inside the bodies artificially made by Sally, which is a huge deal for technology in the verse, by the way. And finally, we have Patry's case. Here, Patry shared his host's body instead of subjugating its soul, and even after the second reincarnation, William's soul was kept alive. Now, since Patry was unable to use another soul's grimoire, he had to find a separate grimoire, which happened to be the 4-leaf clover grimoire that he got using light magic.
Again, big thank you and shout out to Black Tempest for writing that portion of the script. I'll leave a link to his YouTube and his Twitter in the description down below. And if you're interested, you can check out the Black Clover podcast right over there. Now finally, let's move on to Patry's psyche. To add on to Patry's understanding of being the chosen one, he got a 4-leaf clover grimoire, and his personality from that moment on until the moment where he kills pretty much Radis, Sally, and Valtos, his personality as Licht was cemented. Now, like I said before, Patry completely changed his personality to match that of Licht, and this helped him gather a lot of his human followers, and of course his hatred for the Clover Kingdom also helped him recruit characters like Radis, right? So other than this, he was actually able to fool 2 out of the 3 Triad members. He was able to fool Veto and Fana, who admittedly did not have that much of a character before, she was finally reincarnated into her clone body without the limitations of the particular magic stone or the reincarnation spell. So Raya was the only character, apart from William and Patry himself obviously, knew who Patry was. Now, like I mentioned earlier, Patry recruited characters like Radis and Valtos with his hatred for the Clover Kingdom humans, right? So at the end of their relationship, when he kills all 3 of them, he says that he's always hated them because they were all humans and they were acting in like very, very bad ways, I guess. And that's also like super hypocritical of Patry because he's the one who actually fueled their negative reactions and compulsions. So it's super hypocritical for him to be like, oh yeah, bro, you are super bad and I hate humans because of this. But anyway, that's actually one of the more interesting parts of his character. The fact that he's so conflicted, the fact that he's so contradicting, and like it's so clear that he is so broken inside that even before we get to the end, if you can read the subtle clues that Tabata leaves off, you're able to understand just how crazy Patry is as a character. He was so deluded into thinking that this was what Licht would have wanted. By the end of it, he just did not care and he just said, screw this, I'm out. And after he kills the humans, he just leaves, right? So this is really crazy, but in order to understand Patry's even more conflicting sides, I think we need to take a look at the human who was most important to Patry, and that is William Vangeance. So, let's go. Hey, yes, I know, new shirt. You know what they say, new day, new me, right? But anyway, let's get into the actual video now. So, Patry is such an interesting character to me because of the fact that he shared a body with a human for 10 years. Now, he awoke inside of William when William was 16 years old, and he spent the next 10 years just looking at how humans behaved and the way that humans reacted and everything like that, right? So, it's just like, it's crazy to think about how many differing and clashing ideologies that this man must have inside of his brain, and it just like makes it so much more apparent as to why he would like flock and like cling on to that one personality of Licht that he just seems so enamored by. But before we really jump into it, let me give you a little bit of trivia to just show you how absolutely genius the mangaka of Black Clover, Yuki Tabata, is. Now, as we all know, the reincarnation spell was put into place by the devil once Licht turned into a demon. But a question that I never see asked as often as I ask it myself is why and how did all of these hosts just happen to be born at the same time? Why didn't the reincarnation spell just happen to make them reincarnate, like 100 years ago or 100 years later, right? So this is a question that I ask so often because Tabata, like I've said in my previous video, Discrimination, Black Clover, check it out right there, is a genius at subtlety. Oftentimes, it's to the detriment of the series' general perception, but if you do look a little deeper, you can definitely find like the amazingness and the detail that Tabata includes in there. So let me give you a glimpse into this detail. So as I stated before, Patry woke up inside William 10 years before the series began. But why could it not have just been, like 11 years ago when William would have been 15, right? At that same time, Patry was 15 when he died, so their ages would have matched up. Like, there's so many, like, that's a good way to, like, match them up. So why didn't that happen? Now, the reason for this is the reincarnation spell. See, for the reincarnation spell to work, all of these people need to be born around the same time as William. But since this is a spell that was cast by the devil at the last second, he could not really like get all the details right. So that's why you see the ages of all these reincarnated elves all over the place, but within the same lifespan of William. Plus, it wouldn't have really been subtle for Tabata to have just like made all of these reincarnated elves the exact same age, right? So, for Patry to fall in line and actually get the devil his body back, he needed to make sure that all the reincarnated elves were born around the same time and were awake at the same time and alive for Patry to be finally awake and carry out his plan. Now for the reason why Patry woke up exactly 10 years earlier and not earlier. If you think about all the reincarnated elves, who was the youngest elf to be reincarnated? That's right, Marie Adley, sister of Ghost Adley. She was 10 years old when the series began, and Patry had been awake for 10 years when the series began. So his awakening dealt with the fact that all the elves were ready and alive and completely just like ripe for reincarnation whenever Patry was able to carry out that plan. Now, for this theory to make 100% sense, I think we have to make one small assumption, but I don't think it's that big of a reach, because I feel like for the reincarnation spell to have worked in its entirety, you needed all of the elves who the devil chose to reincarnate to be alive at the same time. And I think that just tracks and it makes sense. So now that we're done with that distraction, I think we can finally get into William Vangeance, the character, who and what he meant for Patry. See, for William, ever since he was born, he always felt like there was this kind of person inside of him who was just depressed, hurt, and angry. And when he was 9 years old, he finally started getting visions of this person's life and this person's, more importantly, death, right? And finally, at age 16, Patry woke up and he was finally able to take over William's body. And William finally understood that these were not just like some haphazard dreams that he was having with no reason. It was because there was another person inside of him, and it was this person's memories and life that he had been witnessing all his life, and this person was the one who was depressed and sad. He had always felt Patry inside of him all the time when he was being discriminated against, and he could really understand the rage of Patry. This is because what happened to Patry when he was 15 years old, right, which was exactly around the same age that William was. He had seen his entire family and tribe get killed during an auspicious day, which was supposed to be a wedding, and it was done by human nobles. And this was the same human nobles, royals, sorry. It was the same human royals or nobles. William, like he was being discriminated against by the royals and nobles. So he could definitely understand Patry's pain. Even during the darkest moments, William really never really felt alone, because he could feel that hurt soul inside of him, and he always had Patry as somebody to protect. He had to stay strong for Patry inside of him to make sure that he doesn't crumble himself, so that the person inside had something to lean on, which is just such beautiful character writing for William. And like I said, I'm definitely going to be making another video on William, so make sure you subscribe to get that. Patry really felt this urge to protect William and make sure that whatever he needed to happen like really came true, because this like really strong need that obviously was enhanced by the resurrection spell that the devil cast on Patry, which is what made him go a little crazy like throughout this entirety as being the leader of the Eye of the Midnight Sun. Like, William really understood the unwavering need in order to get revenge. So this gives you even more context as to why just William could not choose between Patry and Julius, because Patry, he felt that exact same feeling that Patry felt, but at the same time he felt something similar for Julius, so he really could not separate the two of them. And it's just such an interesting character that I'm just definitely gonna make the video like I was talking about. Finally, before and after the Julius fights, we finally get Patry's thoughts on William. See, to Patry, William was that one human friend that he could not kill. He understood William for who he truly was, because unlike Lumiere and Tetia, whose intentions Patry could not really discern from just their way of life, he was able to go inside William's inner thoughts and psyche, and was able to finally like completely understand that William genuinely cared for Patry. It was not a faux caring. He was genuinely like interested to see Patry succeed, and like even though it hurt him so much, he could not choose between Julius and Patry, because he genuinely really had an admiration for Patry. So, two of the moments that really showcased Patry's affection and respect for William are as follows. So, the first moment is when Patry, immediately after transforming in front of Julius, is when he kneels down, takes off William's mask, and places it gently on the ground, right? This is a sign of respect and admiration for something that William really cared a lot about, because that's the mask that Julius gave him in order to cover up that curse that really like haunted him all his life. And this is genuinely like brilliant, because rather than telling you, this is just like showing you. And this is like so many of these moments that I wish that Tabata would include in Black Clover, because when it comes to a fantasy show, I feel like exposition is such an important thing. But we'll come to that in the later part of this video. And the second moment that would really like showcase Patry's admiration for William is when, like, after he's done killing Julius, he goes to the stone slab and then he places William's grimoire gently on the stone slab, and then he states there are no more humans that he cannot kill anymore. And then this dude like just like immediately turns around and then kills Sally, Valtos, and Rades. Just like, how insane do you have to be? But yeah, you know, his contradictory nature is one of my favorite things about him, so we'll get to that in the next part. So that moment, coupled along with the time when Patry and William were able to meet face to face when Patry got his own physical body, just cements the relationship as one of the purest relationships you can have between two people. It's just really nice. And I know this might be a little controversial to say, but in my opinion, I feel like William was more important to Patry than the elves themselves. And I feel like this is something thing that even Patry failed to realize, because if he had realized this, I don't think he would have genuinely like gone through with the elven reincarnation plan, even if he felt that way. But you know, obviously the devil is still involved, so he like completely like takes over any sense that Patry has. You know, the reincarnation spell does that. We've seen this with every single elf. Even every single elf that fought didn't really want to fight, and then once Asta like completely disbanded their souls, we saw what they genuinely thought. So the reason why I say William was probably more important to Patry than the other elves is basically simply just this one thing. Now, other than the Eye of the Midnight Sun's third eye, only two of them actually thought he was Licht. The other one, Raya, genuinely thought he was Patry, but he never really addressed it except for saying, you're Licht? Okay, cool, fine. And then he like shakes his hand and then gets up. And then towards the end, when Raya gets that hole in his stomach, and then he reveals, I am a liar and this is my sin, right? It's just like, other than that particular moment with Raya, like even the elves, once they reincarnate, they just like dismiss Patry's personality change. There's just something that's like, oh yeah, he's just obsessed with Licht, so he just wants to be like him. And then Patry immediately drops this faux like personality that he's been putting on as Licht and just like goes to being Patry. But the only person like throughout that entire duration of him being Patry, which was for like 10 years, was only William, right? It's insane because William was the only one who saw Patry for who he was beyond the Licht persona, and he still accepted him and he still wanted him to succeed. Like, who would do that? Like, unless you're like really connected like these two characters, I don't think anybody would. And I feel like that's the important part. Like, William accepted Patry for who he was, exactly like Licht accepted him for who he was later on in that arc. So without William genuinely understanding who Patry is, and without Patry having that Licht persona to grab onto, Patry would have been a broken mess. Like I said, he has so many clashing ideologies in his head. Like, how would he even know what to cling onto? It's the fact that William was there for him, and it's the fact that this whole Licht persona was there for him, that he was able to hold on to the two of them. And like I said, these two people are the most important people to him in his life, and it's just really cemented right there. William just adds that layer of personality and character to Patry that I feel like most, if not all, antagonists are missing. And speaking of antagonists, I think it's finally time to head into the crux of this video, why I think Patry is a great antagonist. And to do that, we need to put him up against a villain and explain why that villain overshadowing him really isn't fair. So let's talk about the... Haha, hey everybody, I know I teased you with the devil right there, but like I said before, this is a two-parter, and if it's the 20th of August or beyond, the second part should already be out, so make sure you go watch that. But with that said, my name is Buzzard. I would be really grateful if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.